Welcome to the Daily Coffee Pro friends. Happy end of your week or happy beginning of your week if you're listening to this rather than watching it. But if you are watching now live, happy end of your week. Today we are talking about the cost of green coffee per pound. Before we get started, if you are watching this, check out these caps and let us know if we should add them to our merch store. These are our new branded Mapper Forward caps, and we're thinking of adding them to our merch store to start helping us generate revenue so that we can pay for an investigative journalist to start looking into following the money when it comes to the coffee supply chain. Back to what this episode is about, the cost of green coffee per pound. Before we deep dive into this, I want to direct you to a comic strip that Junior's Roasted Coffee had done. If you go to KettNerd, that's KettNerd.com, you will see it's kettnerd.com/the-cost-of-production. You will see a comic strip that Junior's commissioned that talks about the coffee supply chain and the cost of coffee, the true value of coffee. They've called it cost of production, navigating coffee's true value. And it is awesome. Shout out to Karen Nelson for emailing me a link to this comic strip. It really is fantastic. And it formulated part of my research for the episode of the Mapper Forward podcast that we had this week with Stephen and with Felipe. A couple things that have really become apparent throughout all the research that I've been doing around would it really cost to produce a bag of coffee? And something that's really important to think about is that nobody knows. Most of the farmers don't actually know what it costs to produce a pound of their own green coffee. This is shocking to me, but it shouldn't be, because if you ask most cafe owners what it costs them to make a 12-ounce latte, a lot of them couldn't tell you either. And as Felipe said on the podcast earlier this week, farmers are notoriously bad at record keeping and bookkeeping and accounting. So are cafe owners, so are roasters. And so when you actually ask a farmer how much it cost them to produce a pound of coffee, they couldn't tell you, the majority of them. And this is a real problem. You add to that the cost to produce a pound of coffee is very different to the cost of doing business for a coffee farm. That adds an additional layer of complexity to understanding what a pound of coffee costs like. Then we're going to add another layer to that and say, not all coffee is created equal. So we have coffee that's commercially traded on the sea market, which is typically of lesser quality than specialty coffee, which can be traded on the sea market, but it is most likely traded directly through relationship buying. And it costs more to grow good coffee. And it costs more to have better soil that can grow good coffee. And it costs more to have better skilled labor that knows how to how to pick cherry at the right age. All of these complexities add to the cost of a pound of green coffee. Let's talk about what we mean by the cost of doing business. So when Felipe was explaining this on the epic 3-hour and 5-minute podcast we had earlier this week, coffee is a complex agricultural product that requires long-term investment. So it takes 3 years for the trees to get to a fruiting stage, and then about 7 to 8 years for them to mature. You've got to fund your farm with no return from that coffee for the first 3 years. So usually farmers, from what has been explained to me, are working off bank loans during that time. Then the thing is, what happens from there, depending on the quality of the coffee that they're growing, if they are selling commercial coffee that's based on the C market, the relationship between the price on the C market isn't directly proportional or proportionate to the quality of the coffee that's being bought from the farmer. Now, a differential can be attached to that price on the C market, and from what has been explained to me, what that means is it's an additional price to the C market price. That means that, like, you're going to buy something that scores a certain price. So you're not just buying a standard off-the-shelf kind of commodity or commercial coffee. You are asking for something that's a little bit extra based on the differential. But the cost of creating a pound of green coffee and the cost of doing business as a coffee farmer, they're very different things. And unfortunately, the reason that so many of these farmers are going into long-term debt, particularly during the coffee crisis that we're experiencing now, that is, like we've said before, cyclical, which means that this happens in cycles. This has happened before a number of times where we end up in this coffee crisis. And as we've been told on this podcast, there are people who are still in debt from the last time that happened in the 90s. And the price went down to 42 cents per pound. And so these farmers end up in all this debt where they have to borrow more money from the banks, and they end up in really long-term debt. And this contributes to the cost of doing business. Also adds to that farmers don't get paid in a standardized kind of way. And this changes from origin to origin. Everything we've just said is different in every origin in the way that it works. And if you did listen to the episode that we did with Stephen and Felipe, you'll be very familiar with the fact that the coffee supply chain is hugely complex. And it is not only complex in general, it's complex within each origin. And so the number of times that that coffee changes hands from the time it's picked to the time it gets to export is many, many times. And at each time, people are paid differently. Sometimes they're paid on the spot. In other times, as it goes from farm gate to wet mill to dry mill, it's getting exchanged financially, but they're not getting paid for it until it's delivered and taken. It's taken into the warehouse of the end green coffee consumer. So that could be a year down the track, and they're not getting paid until then. The credit that they have to live off in that time as well contributes to the cost of doing business. So all of these additional costs contribute to a pound of green coffee that typically we are not aware of on the front end of the supply chain. If we're going to understand the supply chain better and understand a solution towards fixing this coffee crisis and building a better relationship between the green buyer, the farmer of the green coffee and the front end customer, we have to start accepting these kinds of things when we're considering what we'll pay for a pound of coffee. Because, we talked yesterday about economy of scales. Unless we're buying a fuck ton of coffee off farmers, the kinds of dollars that we're exchanging on the C market, well, even today it's at 89. It just doesn't make sense that a farmer borrowing the kinds of money that farmers are borrowing right now, it just doesn't make sense that they could make anything just based off the C market. We really do have to heavily look at relationship buying, using the hashtag "This is your coffee farmer" and getting the image of who our coffee farmer or coffee farmers are front and center of our customers. So they want to support businesses who engage in relationship buying. And we have to be paying a fair price. We have to be saying to the farmers, like, what does it cost you to produce a bag of coffee? A 60 kilo bag of coffee. And then my friend Christopher Ferran said this: if the coffee that you're wanting from this farmer is an 89, but right now they're producing an 84 or an 85, have a conversation with that farmer about how long they think it's going to take them to get to an 89 and pay them this year for an 89. Because they're going to need some money to turn that coffee into an 89. And they're not going to be able to find that money now. They need investment from us in order to get that growth. And from everything that I can see, the person who is making so far the most money in the coffee supply chain is the coffee roaster. So please, if I am wrong on that, I would love to hear your reasons as to why. But if I just follow the money so far, the roasters are making more than anybody. And I would love to be proven wrong. I mean, what the fuck do I know? I'm looking at this purely from, 1 + 1 = 2. I don't have an agenda or a vested interest for this to work out in any one particular way. But I just can't see how it can be anybody but the roaster who is making the most money off coffee. Now, I agree. Everything that we've said about the coffee farmer is applicable to the roaster. The cost of producing a bag of coffee is different from the cost of doing business to produce that bag of coffee roasted. So what am I missing? Because even when I look at that, I'm still seeing that the roaster's coming up with the biggest margins here. So if you do have some feedback for me, you do have some suggestions for how I may be able to look at this in a different way, hit me up on social media at imapitforward on Instagram, DM or comment, and let's see if we can keep following the money. Have an amazing rest of your day, friends. Peace, love, and peanut butter.